So I teach human-centered design at the University of Kentucky, and in my journey through this process of thinking like a designer and teaching others to do the same, I've kind of become that guy, and by that I mean maybe we're kindred spirits in this, but I'm continually astounded by how often we have to put up with just such crappy stuff. Bad design, poor design. And you know, I'm also in the education reform field, and so there's an old joke in reform circles, such as we do have jokes, and it can't really be that old because how long has the reform effort really been going on? But that, you know, if you plopped someone time traveled from the 19th century and they landed in an operating room in a hospital, they'd have no idea where they were. But if they time traveled to the present and fell into a classroom, they'd know exactly where they were. And so building on this theme of like, classrooms really haven't changed, I've been thinking about this. Why is it that we put up with this sort of thing is what sort of makes me wonder. Because assuredly there's a cost to bad design. And Richard Simmons, in a piece done out of by the Center for Architecture and Built Environment in England, talks about how poor design imposes costs on society. And a key reason for this is that the costs are not taken by the designer, they're taken by society. So the hard work of putting in the design is really not done on the front end, and so then there's a large cost on the back side. Doesn't seem quite fair because a lot of people are affected by one person's poor design, but it seems to me if they put in a little effort, we might have a better effect, and that's a better return. So the question is, like, why does this happen? And I've also been fascinated by, in the design process, particularly this first phase, if you're a subscriber to human-centered design, is the phase around empathy and need finding. And I've become fairly convinced that this really accounts for the lion's share of what accounts for a really good design. And so I've been thinking, and so this summer I read a book that really changed my way of thinking on this. It's A General Theory of Love by 3 physicians out of San Francisco. And it really talks about the way the brain works in terms of our relationships with each other, from when we're children and how we deal with our parents and our mother, to when we grow up and we fall in love with other people. And it's a wonderful tour de force on how our brain really operates around how our cognitive processes work in terms of the way we think and ultimately the way we design. So it turns out that when we think about the way our brain works, the story starts when we were building the railroads in the 1800s. I'll tell you a brief story about a gentleman named Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage is quite famous. He was found in most of all the neurological textbooks these days, and he's famous for a couple of reasons. In 1848, in Cavendish, Vermont, Phineas Gage was the foreman of a railroad group laying bed for the track when they came upon a large set of rock. He took it upon himself to set the charge to put the rock away, and taking a tamping iron, a 42-inch, 13-pound steel tamping iron with powder in the hole, he struck it in there, and a spark went off. He was then had what his doctor called an abrupt and intrusive visitor. What had happened was that the tamping iron entered in through his cheek, up through the front of his skull, exited some distance away, and landed, and he fell to the ground. Now, what's most remarkable about this is that he lived, and you would think that that would be the thing, and here he is some years later with the very tamping iron that went through his head. But the more amazing thing is what his doctor discovered as they treated him. After this thing went through his head, he actually got up and walked up a flight of stairs to his doctor's office, spoke to his doctor about the event that had happened, and went on to live several years afterwards. He did die from complications we think related to this accident. But the more interesting part related to the brain is that his friends talked about him in ways that said he was different. So he was a very industrious and very persistent gentleman. He was a hard worker and very gentlemanly. After the accident, he cursed all the time. He couldn't keep plans. He was very hard to be around, very difficult person to live with. And basically what his friends had said, that he was no longer Gage. And so what had happened was that this event really started to tell the story of the fact that our brain has different areas that account for our emotions, our feelings, our behaviors. So what's really going on upstairs in our brain? what we have, and I'm going to talk to you in broad brushstrokes about MacLean's theory for the triune brain. And basically what we have are three parts. Up in the lower center with the cross-hatching, we've got our reptile brain. And this is the brain that kind of keeps us going and running. And then around that is our limbic brain. And then on top is our most recent, or evolutionarily speaking, of our neocortex. And all of these brains work together, but they're also very independent, hence the name triune, 3 and 1. So what do we really have going on in here? If we talk about our reptile brain, our limbic brain, and our neocortex, let's talk a little bit about our reptile brain. This is the brain that's the oldest, sort of in evolutionary terms, inside our head. And what's interesting about it is it just keeps the light on. This great quote, it's so far from the head that it doesn't even know there's a head. And so it's keeping, it regulates our blood pressure, it keeps our heart beating. It's the part of the brain that keeps running even though when, for instance, you're on life support, you're still alive. And yet, the question becomes, are you still human when this is the only thing going? So reptiles, hence the name, tend to operate on most of this mode. Conversely, the limbic brain that you have in you is the part that specializes in detecting and analyzing just one interesting part. It does a lot of other things, but the most interesting part for the purposes of our discussion today is that it can help you detect the internal state of others. Lizards, the Komodo dragon, doesn't have a limbic brain. So the limbic brain also offers you things that you find when you're, for instance, your mother, things that mammals have, for instance, the separation cry that a kitten may give for when it's away from its mother, brings the mother calling. That's part of your limbic brain. Lizards don't do that. When lizards do that and the mother comes, the mom might eat them. And so this is what differentiates us in these regards. And then lastly, we have our neocortex. And the neocortex is really accountable for the towering achievements that we've done as humans. And for instance, my ability to speak to you right now in abstract terms and your ability to understand what I'm talking about has everything to do with your neocortex. And what's troubling about all of this, and hence sort of the talk that I'm saying, the civil war in our brains, is that your neocortex and your limbic brain are kind of at a war with each other. And the problem is that you don't even really realize that it's going on. And so if we think about the war, here's another way I've been thinking about it. And so let's say we have the you have your lizard brain, and this is a family. And so you've got the mom and dad, and they're down there in the reptile brain. I'm not saying that parents are like reptiles, but rather that they're the ones that they pay for the rent, they keep the lights on, they feed the kids, everything's going, but they're a little checked out on what the kids are doing. They really don't really know what the twins are really doing. And then you've got in the center there one of the children, which is your limbic brain, and they've got a real heart, and they really are emotional, and they sense things really deeply. And when they feel something, it really hurts. But the problem is that the older brother, the younger brother, who's though bigger, is always telling the limbic brain, it's like, no, you're wrong. No, that's not the way. In fact, I've got a better way, and it's smarter, and it's quicker, and you're going to like it, and you're going to take it. And so this sort of war goes on between the brains, and it's really sort of irritating. And what happens, I'm arguing, is that the neocortex tends to win because we try to talk ourselves out of what we feel really is the right thing to do. So how might this look in terms of or why is this limbic system so special? And what I want to impart to you is to start to listen more to your emotional side of your brain. This notion that the limbic brain is in charge of our ability to sense the internal feelings and notions of others is unique to humans in many regards and is quite special and magical. For instance, who among us is not fascinated by the fact that bats can echolocate, that they can use sonar at night and fly about and see bugs and eat them while in flight? Fantastic. Who hasn't wanted to have that kind of power? Very amazing. Very amazing. Or take, for instance, the electric mapping abilities of some eels, so they can sense the magnetic resonance of other animals in the sea, map out where they are, go eat them. Can do that all without any sort of sight or smell. Fantastic abilities that we don't possess. We possess neither of these. However, we do possess something that others don't possess, and this is what the authors call limbic resonance. And that's this notion of your ability to sense the inner world of others. So how might this go? What does this look like? Have you ever been to the aquarium, and maybe you've looked in the eye of a shark, or maybe you've looked at a reptile, but you look at a shark, you look in the eye, there's really nothing there. It's pretty dead. can't really sense what's going on, don't know what's inside the internal thoughts of this animal except maybe your lunch, but that's about it, right? But let me ask you this. What about when you look at something like this? Gotcha. And the reason you did that is because you have a limbic brain and so do dogs. There's a reason why your dog knows that you've had a bad day. Have you ever sensed that if you have a dog and say, God, my dog knew that? Yeah, that's because they have limbic resonance with you. They have some. They also have a neocortex, not as big as ours, but they have one. So this is what's the sort of thing going on. So what about now? It's different, but it's there. And so this ability to look into the eyes of others and sense this is something that we give a little bit of short shrift to, I think. I think that we've outsmarted ourselves into poor design. And we've let our neocortex talk us out of where we need to go, which is to listen to our empathetic limbic side, which is really important. So Lewis, Armani, and Lannon in their book talk about how our society underplays the importance of emotions. And having allied itself with our neocortical brain, our culture is promoting analysis over intuition, logic above feeling. It goes back to the notions of earlier talks about the standardized tests really doing well. The neocortex aligns itself with conventional, what we call conventional intelligence, but it's not the emotional side that really lends itself to good design. So as Sandy Spicer talks about at IDEO, if you don't understand the lives and passions of the people that you're designing for, then you end up designing an experience that's about what your assumptions are about what's right, not about what is really needed by the people to really shine. And so I'd suggest that if we could be more like that, then we could design the schools that we want. Thank you.